He's almost 9. He's Cosmos' younger brother, Bioforce continued. He's happy, well-adjusted, playful, outgoing, immature. Good, then IQ can gain his own maturity, Amunet said. Omni, come to the command center, Omni heard from his own personal comm. He quickly made it to his destination as Darkspeed tailed him. What is it? Prism started pointing at a satellite image and started talking fast. The 2 we let go have stopped at one base and then were directed to another. Our sensors show an energy discharge that could be a black ball gun. You think Vector might be there? Omni asked. It fits his profile, or it might be the black rifles that he had some of his villains use. He would never arm his minions as well as himself. That was a one-time thing to get my attention and bring me close to his time weapon. I'll go and check this out. Omni looked to see a metal hatch where he had burst through the wall. The hatch quickly opened up. Just for you, Prism said. Darkspeed watched Omni leave and blinked back to the rest of the team. Omni went after Vector. I know where. Are you talking about leaving here and following without permission? Bioforce said. I'm in, Olympian said. Me too, she said. Can you wake Virtuoso? Darkspeed asked Bioforce. I guess that means I'm overruled, Bioforce said as she woke Virtuoso. Where's Cosmos? She asked. Guarded by Glimmer. She thinks he needs 8 hours sleep. He only slept 4 or 5 a night at Alpha. How long has he been down? Virtuoso asked. About 6 hours now, Bioforce said. Just ask her to tag along, then she'll be fine with it, Olympian said. That makes sense. Good thinking, Darkspeed said. Just like home. When my brothers were going to do something they didn't want me to tell Papa, they would make sure I was just as guilty as them. That explains a lot, she said. Yeah, it does, Olympian said with a touch of sadness in his voice. The memory of his fallen brother was still very fresh. It was she that eventually convinced Glimmer that it would be excusable to leave while her team was resting. On the one hand, she was told to stay with second team at all times, and on the other hand, she was told to guard Cosmos at all times. She eventually chose to interpret the last standing order as her invitation to stick with first team on their adventure. Vector paced around the wounded man on the ground. Every time I get an unsatisfactory answer, you lose a pound of flesh. Several of Vector's villains were spaced around in the old building they stood in. The man on the ground was one of the 2 surviving villains that were held in the London HQ. Once they had made their way back, a call was put out to Vector. He was informed that 2 that were suspected of being caught by the heroes had found their way home. I swear, we just got separated in the fight, the wounded villain said. Vector moved at high speed, and those around him only saw him blink from one place to another. The wounded villain slumped over. The other villain, once called Snitchy, froze in fear. No one knew what Vector had done to the wounded one, but he no longer moved. Turns out it was an important pound of flesh. Now, if you tell me the truth and I'm upset, you may die. If you lie to me, you will die. Vector pointed at the last captured villain and continued. You, tell me where you were. I was captured going after the Pringle kid. This one said Omni killed everyone, except for him and one other. Omni came down to where they were holding us. He killed the other one and beat the 2 of us for information. One of the brains let us go, the villain said with his head bowed. Omni beat you, and yet you live. And why would a brain let you go? Vector let the questions hang before continuing. Well, what you said was partly true. He always keeps 2 around after a big fight to extract information from. He's a creature of habit. Vector paced around the 2 men. Did you give him any useful information? We gave him information about the destroyed satellite system. Nothing that they could use. Nothing? Your being here is something. Did they plant any tracking devices on you? No, sir. They took our weapons away and let us go as we are, the second villain said. Are you sure? Are you smart enough to know if they did? Did they take your clothes? Did they perform a physical? How was the food there? Vector stared at him for a reaction. They can put a tracker in the food? Vector just shook his head. Do you know the reason I surround myself with the likes of you? It's because you're too stupid to ever successfully betray me. The alarm on Vector's belt started beeping and shocking him at super speed. It caused him to involuntarily turn his speed up to maximum to turn it off. He turned the palm of his golden hand toward his face and looked at the display screen that morphed into existence. He's quicker this time. I have to keep that in mind, Vector thought as he dropped out of super speed. Here's your chance to redeem yourself. I just got notice that an HU jackbooted hitter is on his way here. I want everyone to bring your best game and beat him down. The villains started to make themselves ready for combat. Vector started to point where they should stand and took position behind them. The villains looked like a pack of wolves ready to pounce. Omni found the abandoned airfield deep in the African jungle. He remembered the time distortion that manifested the instant before the time weapon transported him back in time. Omni prepared to fly up at a near infinite speed if that happened again. This was one of the few times he was ever cautious about entering a villain's lair. Fodder, Vector thought to himself as he activated the device on his belt buckle. The other villains were surprised when Vector disappeared in a silvery flash. They tried not to appear shaken by his leaving. The stronger villains still considered this their moment to shine. First Team teleported just in time to see Omni fly into the largest hangar like a bullet. They were witnesses to the windows shattering and rush of air from his approach. "Let's go," Olympian said. "Wait!" Cosmos screamed. "On the ground around the hangar, there's a gravity field. He must have made it to crush anyone leaving." "Don't go into that," Darkspeed said. Inside, Omni looked around to see which villains were there and if Vector himself was there. He had the ability to move several times faster than any of the villains in the room, but stood still and just took the details in. Many of the villains had taken a stance around Omni and started hitting him with everything they had. One of the larger enforcers swung a giant axe overhead and down upon Omni. Omni didn't move, flinch, or react to any of the attacks. These villains were no threat to him. He was looking for Vector. Since Vector was not to be found, Omni looked around at the villains present. He noticed one that had a high-tech microcomputer on his belt, another had no weapons and a collection of gadgets on his belt. Those must be what pass for techs around here, Omni thought. At the speed of his own thoughts, Omni directed his power out and away from himself. The cold he projected froze all but the two he singled out. The others were literally frozen solid into statues of iced villain. Outside, First Team saw the windows freeze over and the building turn a frost-like color. The grass and the vegetation directly outside of the building frosted over. The members of First Team could feel the raw cold coming from where Omni was. Virtuoso started using her power to look for clues in the minds of the villains. Omni stared at the two frightened techs. He raised his hand over his head and placed his middle finger against his thumb. To anyone looking on, it looked like he was going to snap his fingers. Omni then exerted what to him was just a little pressure, but the force between his fingers could crush mountains. The instant Omni snapped his fingers, the shock wave was no different than a small bomb going off in the hangar. The windows all blew out of the building and the noise was deafening. The frozen metal roof shattered in places and deformed. Most frighteningly, the frozen villain statues shattered into thousands of pieces that scattered around on the floor. Omni never stopped staring at the villain techs. They were weaker villains that found a place in Vector's forces by doing his tech work. Surviving the blast was a feat in itself. Omni walked slowly toward them, his boots crunching as he stepped on shattered pieces of frozen villain. He stopped as he stood over the shaking villains. "Can you hear me?" Omni asked. "Yes, I can," the first tech said. The second tech nodded. He was too scared to speak. Omni knelt down on one knee and rested his forearms on his other knee. His eyes showed no mercy or care for their injury. "Your lives are over. How you answer my questions will determine how you leave this world," Omni said with no emotion. Outside, Virtuoso could hear the thoughts of the villains on the ground. "We shouldn't be here. We need to go." Darkspeed looked at her funny. "We're here to back him up, and maybe—" "I'm leaving now. You coming?" Virtuoso held her hands out for everyone to grab onto. Darkspeed was the last to grab onto Virtuoso, just as the first scream came from the hangar. First Team appeared back in the room that they had been occupying at the London HQ. "Where were you?" Dr. DeClute asked. Darkspeed turned around to see Dr. DeClute already standing in the room. "We just went out for a moment." "Bioforce, where did you go?" Bioforce didn't want to get anyone in trouble." "I'll get Amunet in here if I don't get some answers," Dr. DeClute said. "We followed Omni to a villain base. He was looking for Vector and he wasn't there," Virtuoso said. "If Arthur or Omni hears you did something like that, you'll be taken out of action," Dr. DeClute said with force. Darkspeed was surprised to see Dr. DeClute might actually be on their side. "Sorry, we just thought we could help." "You have been helping. That's why I'm not turning you in." "What did Omni find there?" "I got the only information they had. I think Omni's working out some anger issues on Vector's followers," Virtuoso said. "Why? Because he was getting some payback on the bad guys?" Olympian asked. "No, because he was getting payback slowly. Very slowly. You could hear their thoughts. That's why you wanted to leave," she said. "Yeah, and it was unpleasant."